Hello everyone, and welcome. I'm excited to have you here today. Today, we're going to explore tracing changes through 1,000 years. This presentation will take us on a journey through history, highlighting key transformations over the centuries. We'll look at how societies, cultures, and ideas have evolved and shaped the world we live in now. So, let's get started and dive into this fascinating story of change and continuity. Let's now look at the second section of our presentation, titled Changes Over Time. This part emphasizes how history and our understanding of it have evolved through different periods. It highlights the importance of recognizing the shifts in social, political, and cultural aspects over time. By examining these changes, we can better appreciate the dynamic nature of history and how each era influences the next. This section also connects to our overall theme by showing that history is not static. It is always in motion, shaped by new discoveries, perspectives, and interpretations. Understanding this progression helps us develop a more nuanced view of the past and its relevance to our present and future. Let's take a closer look at these two maps. Map 1 was created in 1154 CE by the Arab geographer Al-Idrisi. What's interesting here is that this map is a detailed depiction of the Indian subcontinent, and it's part of his larger world map. Now, if you look at the section reproduced here, you can see how he represented this region. Map 2, on the other hand, was made much later in the 1720s by a French cartographer. When we compare these two maps of the same area, the differences are quite striking. Despite both maps focusing on the Indian subcontinent, their representations vary significantly. A key point to notice is how Al-Idrisi's map places South India, where we'd expect to find North India today, and Sri Lanka is shown as an island at the top of his map. This highlights how geographic knowledge and map-making techniques evolved over time. Connecting this to our overall theme, these maps show us that our understanding of the world is always changing, shaped by new discoveries and perspectives. It's a reminder of the importance of historical context when studying geography. Now let's take a look at slide 4, titled Changes Over Time. Here, we see Map 2, which was created nearly 600 years after Map 1. That's a huge span of time, and during this period, our knowledge about the subcontinent changed significantly. If you compare the two maps, you'll notice that Map 2 looks much more familiar to us today, especially the coastal areas, which are surprisingly detailed in this later map. This increased detail reflects the advancements in navigation and exploration. In fact, this map was used by European sailors and merchants during their voyages, helping them navigate and trade more effectively. It's a great example of how geographic knowledge evolved and became more accurate over time, shaping the way people explored and understood this region. This progress in mapping also ties into the broader theme of how exploration and information sharing transformed our understanding of the world. When we look at historical records, we see that they exist in many different languages, and these languages have evolved quite a bit over time. For example, medieval Persian is quite different from the Persian we speak today. And it's not just about grammar or vocabulary. Words themselves often change meanings. Take the word Hindustan, for instance. Today, we usually think of it as the modern nation of India. But back in the 13th century, when a chronicler named Minhaj Suraj used the term, he was referring to a specific region that included Punjab, Haryana, and the lands between the Ganges and Yamuna rivers. At that time, it had a more political connotation, relating to the lands controlled by the Delhi Sultanate. This highlights an important point for our overall theme. Understanding terminology, both old and new, is crucial in interpreting historical texts accurately. Words that seem straightforward today might have had very different meanings centuries ago, which can really shape how we understand historical contexts and narratives. Let's talk about the terminologies of Hindustan, both new and old. The scope of what was included under the term Hindustan actually changed over time, depending on the extent of the Sultanate's reach. But one important thing to note is that the term never really extended into South India. In the early 16th century, Babur, the founder of the Mughal Empire, used the word Hindustan to describe not just the geography of the region, but also its fauna and the culture of the people living there. It was a broad way of referring to the entire subcontinent's diverse environment and communities. What's interesting is that this usage is somewhat similar to how a 14th century poet named Amir Khusrau used the word hind. Later in the chapter, we'll see how Khusrau's use of hind was more poetic and perhaps more simplified, but it shows that these terms evolved over time and had layered meanings. Overall, understanding these terminologies helps us grasp how people historically viewed and defined the vast and diverse Indian subcontinent. When we talk about historians and their sources, it's important to understand that they use a variety of materials to piece together the past. The type of sources they rely on really depends on the specific period they're studying and what questions they're trying to answer. For example, they might look at coins, which can tell us a lot about economic history and rulers, or inscriptions that provide direct written records from the time. Architecture is another valuable source, giving us insights into the culture and technological capabilities of different periods. And of course, textual records, like manuscripts, letters, or official documents, are some of the richest sources of information. What's really interesting is that during certain periods, especially the one we're focusing on today, the number and variety of textual records increased dramatically. This means that written materials became more abundant and more diverse, providing a wealth of new perspectives. Over time, these written records began to replace many other types of sources, like artifacts or inscriptions, because they could convey detailed information more efficiently. This shift highlights how the study of history evolves, how the tools and sources we rely on change depending on the context. And understanding this helps us see the bigger picture of how history is reconstructed from the available evidence. As paper became more affordable and accessible, it opened up new opportunities for recording and sharing information. People used it to write down holy texts, chronicles of rulers, letters, teachings of saints, petitions, judicial records, and even registers of accounts and taxes. These writings, or manuscripts, were highly valued and collected by wealthy individuals, rulers, monasteries, and temples. They were stored in libraries and archives, creating a rich repository of historical material. These documents are incredibly valuable for historians because they offer detailed insights into the past. However, they can also be challenging to work with, as they often require careful interpretation and understanding of their context. Overall, these manuscripts are vital sources that help us piece together history, but they also remind us of the importance of careful analysis when studying the past. Now, let's talk about some of the issues with manuscripts in those early times. Imagine there was no printing press back then, so scribes had to copy texts by hand. And as you might guess, this process wasn't perfect. Scribes often unintentionally made small changes, adding or omitting a word, rephrasing a sentence. Over many generations of copying, these tiny differences accumulated. What started as a faithful copy gradually became quite different from the original. This is a key point because it shows how challenging it was to preserve texts accurately before the printing press revolutionized the process. It also highlights why we need to be careful when studying ancient manuscripts, as variations can tell us a lot about how texts evolved over time. Let's talk about some of the key problems faced by historians today. One major issue is that we rarely have access to the original manuscripts written by the authors themselves. Instead, what we usually find are copies made by scribes who came after the original author. This means that the versions of texts we work with are often secondary or even tertiary copies. Because of this, historians face the challenge of comparing different manuscript versions of the same text. By doing so, we try to piece together what the original author might have actually written. This process is essential because it affects how accurately we understand historical events and ideas. So, in a way, our quest for the true story depends heavily on how carefully we can analyze and interpret these copies and variations. This challenge highlights just how complex and careful the work of history really is, especially when trying to reconstruct the past as accurately as possible. Let's talk about Ziauddin Barani, a key figure in our understanding of 14th century India. He was a chronicler who first wrote his history in 1356, and then he created a second version just 2 years later. What's fascinating is that these two accounts are actually different from each other. For a long time, historians only knew about the later version because the original was lost in large library collections. It wasn't until the 1960s that scholars discovered the existence of the first version. This discovery has been important because it gives us a broader perspective on how history was recorded and interpreted during that time. It also highlights how fragile historical sources can be, and why uncovering these earlier texts can really deepen our understanding of the period. So, Bharani's work is crucial, not just for its content, but also for what it reveals about the challenges of historical preservation and interpretation. Now, as we explore this period between 700 and 1750, it's important to understand that this was an incredibly dynamic and complex era for historians to study. The sheer scale and variety of developments make it a real challenge. During this time, we see the emergence of new technologies that transformed daily life and warfare. For example, the Persian wheel revolutionized irrigation, making water management more efficient. The spinning wheel changed the weaving process, boosting textile production. Firearms appeared on the battlefield, altering the nature of combat and power dynamics. At the same time, this period introduced new foods and beverages into the subcontinent: potatoes, corn, chilies, tea, and coffee, each of which had a significant impact on diets, agriculture, and trade. These changes weren't just technological or culinary. They reflected broader economic, political, social, and cultural shifts that shaped societies. And let's not forget mobility. This era was marked by great movement of people. Groups traveled long distances in search of opportunities, whether for trade, conquest, or new settlements. This mobility contributed to the interconnectedness of regions and the exchange of ideas, goods, and cultures. All these elements, technological innovations, new foods, and increased mobility, are interconnected and crucial to understanding the broader theme of change and transformation during these 1,000 years. They highlight how societies evolved and adapted in response to new challenges and opportunities. Let's talk about the Rajputs, a name that actually comes from Rajaputra, meaning the son of a ruler. Between the 8th and 14th centuries, this term was used more broadly to describe a group of warriors who considered themselves part of the Kshatriya caste, the warrior class. But it's not just about kings and chieftains. Many soldiers and commanders serving in various armies across the subcontinent were also included under this banner. What really stands out about the Rajputs is the chivalric code of conduct they followed. Think of it as a set of ideals that emphasized extreme bravery, loyalty, and honor. Poets and bards of that time often celebrated these qualities, painting the Rajputs as the epitome of valor and fidelity. So, in the context of our overall theme, understanding the Rajputs helps us see how martial values and a strong sense of identity played a vital role in shaping the history and culture of medieval India. Their legacy is one of courage, loyalty, and a distinct warrior ethos that still captures the imagination today. Now, let's look at some other important groups of people during this period. The Marathas, Sikhs, Jats, Ahams, and Kayasthas all took advantage of the opportunities of the age to expand their political influence. Each of these groups played a significant role in shaping the political landscape of the time. For example, the Marathas emerged as a powerful force in western India, challenging Mughal authority. The Sikhs, with their strong sense of identity and military organization, also gained prominence. The Jats, who were primarily farmers, started asserting themselves in northern India. The Ahams, in the northeast, managed to maintain their independence for a long time. And the Kayasthas, who were traditionally administrators and scribes, began to rise in bureaucratic roles. Overall, these groups used the shifting political opportunities to strengthen their positions, which contributed to the complex and dynamic nature of Indian politics during this era. Their rise highlights how diverse communities adapted and thrived amidst changing power structures, reinforcing the broader theme of social and political transformation in this period. Let's talk about the changes in their habitat. Over time, there was a gradual clearing of forests and an extension of agriculture. This process wasn't uniform. Some areas experienced faster and more complete changes than others. As a result, many forest dwellers were forced to migrate to new areas. Others adapted by starting to till the land, effectively becoming peasants. These new peasant groups didn't remain isolated for long. They gradually came under the influence of regional markets, chieftains, priests, monasteries, and temples. This led to the development of larger, more complex societies. With this complexity, peasants began to pay taxes and offer goods and services to local lords. This shift brought about significant economic and social differences among the peasants themselves. So, in essence, habitat changes didn't just alter the landscape. They also reshaped social structures and economic relationships, which are crucial to understanding the broader development of these societies. Today, let's talk about jadis or subcastes and how they played a role in social organization. People were grouped into these jadis based on their backgrounds and the kinds of work they did. These groups weren't fixed for life. Instead, their ranks could change depending on how much power, influence, and resources their members controlled. It's important to note that the status of the same jadi could vary from one area to another, reflecting local social dynamics. Jadis also had their own set of rules and regulations to manage how their members behaved and interacted. These rules were enforced by an assembly of elders, often called the jadi panchayat in some regions. This system helped maintain order within the community and reinforced social structures, which ties into the larger theme of how social hierarchies and community controls shaped society back then. On this slide, we're looking at how large states like the Cholas, Tughlaqs, and Mughals covered many different regions. These empires were expansive, often stretching across vast geographic areas. For example, a Sanskrit prashasti praising Delhi Sultan Ghiyasuddin Balban, who ruled from 1266 to 1287, describes his empire as being enormous. It claims that his domain extended from Bengal, known as Gauda in the east, all the way to Ghazni, Gajana, in Afghanistan in the west. It also includes all of South India, called Dravida. However, it's important to note that historians often view these claims with skepticism. They consider such descriptions as exaggerated, likely meant to emphasize the ruler's power and prestige rather than strictly factual accounts of conquests. This idea of large, sprawling empires helps us understand the political landscape of the time. It also connects to our overall theme of how rulers sought to legitimize their authority through grand claims of conquest and territorial control. These descriptions, whether entirely accurate or not, played a significant role in shaping perceptions of power and empire building during this period. By the year 700, we see that many regions had already developed their own unique geographical boundaries, which shaped their identity. These boundaries weren't just physical, they also influenced the languages people spoke and their cultural traditions. Each region was closely linked to specific ruling dynasties, which helped define their political landscape. However, despite these regional differences, there was often significant conflict between these states as they competed for power and resources. It's interesting to note that some dynasties, like the Cholas, Khaljis, Tughlaqs, and Mughals, managed to expand beyond local control and create larger, pan-regional empires. This highlights a key point in our overall theme, the dynamic process of conquest and unification. Even amidst diversity and conflict, these powerful dynasties played a crucial role in shaping a broader, interconnected political landscape across regions. So, after the 18th century, we see the decline of the Mughal Empire, which was a major turning point in the region's history. This decline opened the door for regional states to reemerge and assert their independence. However, it's important to understand that years of imperial rule, especially under the Mughals and other large empires, had a lasting impact on these regions. What this means is that even as new states formed, they carried with them the legacies of the larger empires that had previously governed them. You can see this in the way governance was organized, how economic management was carried out, and even in the cultures of the elites and the languages spoken. These influences didn't disappear. Instead, they shaped the development of many distinct traditions, while also creating shared cultural features across different regions. This blending of old and new, local and imperial, really highlights how history leaves its mark, even as political landscapes shift. And this interconnected past is essential for understanding the diverse and complex identities that emerged in the subcontinent during this period. It shows how the legacies of empire continue to influence regional developments long after the central authority wanes. Today, we're looking at a fascinating period of about 1,000 years, during which major developments in religious traditions took place. What's really interesting is that people's beliefs in the divine could be deeply personal, something they felt internally. But more often, these beliefs were shared collectively within communities. This collective faith in supernatural forces, or religion, was not just a spiritual matter. It was closely intertwined with how local communities were organized socially and economically. So, religion wasn't just about individual beliefs. It played a crucial role in shaping the social fabric and economic life of these societies. This helps us see how religion and daily life were deeply connected, influencing the way communities functioned and grew over time. Now, let's look at Hinduism during this period. It was a time of significant religious development. New deities were being worshipped, reflecting a broader and more diverse spiritual landscape. Royalty invested in constructing temples, which not only served religious purposes, but also elevated their prestige and standing in society. At the same time, the Brahmanas, the priestly class, gained increasing importance. Their deep knowledge of Sanskrit texts and sacred rituals made them highly respected. This intellectual and spiritual authority allowed them to hold a dominant position within society. Their influence was further strengthened by the support of new rulers who sought to boost their own prestige by patronizing these priestly groups. This alliance between rulers and Brahmanas helped solidify the social and religious structures we see emerging during this period, highlighting the evolving nature of Hindu society and its complex hierarchy. On this slide, we're looking at some major developments in religion that really shaped the spiritual landscape. One key idea that emerged was bhakti, which is the concept of loving, personal devotion to a deity. What's important here is that this devotion was accessible to everyone, not just priests or those performing elaborate rituals. It emphasized a direct, personal connection with the divine. Now, moving to the influence of Islam in India, merchants and migrants brought the teachings of the Holy Quran here in the 7th century. The Quran is the sacred book for Muslims, and it emphasizes the sovereignty of one God, Allah. What's significant about this is that Allah's love, mercy, and bounty are inclusive, embracing all believers regardless of their social background. Connecting this to our overall theme, these developments highlight how religious ideas became more personal and accessible, fostering a sense of unity across different communities. Both bhakti and the teachings of Islam contributed to a more inclusive spiritual environment that allowed people from various walks of life to find a connection with the divine. Many rulers historically supported Islam and the ulama, who were the learned theologians and jurists shaping religious thought and practice. Within Islam, there are important sectarian differences, such as between the Shia Muslims and the Sunni Muslims. Shia Muslims believe that Prophet Muhammad's son-in-law, Ali, was the rightful leader of the Muslim community, emphasizing a line of succession through family. On the other hand, Sunni Muslims accept the authority of the early community leaders, known as the Caliphs, who were chosen by consensus or election. These differences extend beyond leadership into various aspects of religious law, theology, and mystic traditions. For example, there are multiple schools of law within Sunni Islam, each with its own interpretations and emphases. Understanding these distinctions is crucial because they reflect the diversity within Islam and how different communities have historically approached faith and governance. Connecting this to our overall theme, it shows how religion, through different schools and interpretations, has played a vital role in shaping political authority and cultural identity across the Islamic world. When we think about time in history, it's important to realize that historians don't just see it as a simple passage of hours, days, or years like on a clock or a calendar. Instead, time also reflects deeper changes in how societies and economies are organized, as well as how ideas and beliefs persist or transform over periods. This means that understanding history involves looking at these shifts and patterns. To make this process easier, we often divide the past into large segments called periods. These periods share common characteristics, making it easier for us to analyze and understand the flow of history. By doing this, we can see how different eras connect and how they influence each other, which is essential for grasping the overall narrative of human development. Let's talk about how British historians in the 19th century viewed Indian history. They divided it into three main periods: Hindu, Muslim, and British. Now, the idea behind this division was that the religion of the ruling power was seen as the most important factor in shaping history. They believed that these religious identities marked significant changes in Indian society and governance. However, it's important to note that this perspective was quite narrow. It overlooked other vital developments like economic changes, cultural transformations, or social movements. Today, very few historians follow this kind of periodization because we understand that history is much more complex and interconnected than just religious identities. This shift in understanding helps us see India's past as a rich tapestry, rather than just a series of religious labels. It also reminds us to approach history with a more nuanced perspective, especially as we study the broader themes of colonial impact and cultural evolution. All right, so last year in our history classes, we explored an exciting variety of early societies. We looked at hunter-gatherers, early farmers, and communities living in towns and villages, as well as the first empires and kingdoms that started to shape the world. It was a fascinating journey through time, helping us understand how human societies evolved. This year, though, we're shifting our focus to what is often called the medieval period. You'll learn about how peasant societies spread across regions, how larger state formations, both regional and imperial, started to emerge and expand. We'll also dive into the development of major religions like Hinduism and Islam, which played huge roles in shaping societies during this time. So essentially, while last year's history was about the foundations and early diversity of human societies, this year's focus is on the more structured, complex societies that developed later, especially in the medieval era. This transition helps us see the bigger picture of how civilizations grew and changed over time, connecting the dots in our overall understanding of history. So, as we look back over these 1,000 years, we see that the societies of the subcontinent were constantly changing and evolving. These transformations weren't just superficial. They often reflected deeper social, political, and economic shifts. In fact, during different periods, some regions experienced such prosperity that their economies became quite impressive. This prosperity was significant enough to attract the attention of European trading companies, which shows how interconnected and dynamic these societies had become. As you continue to explore this book, I encourage you to keep an eye out for signs of these changes, whether they're in the form of new technologies, shifts in trade routes, or cultural exchanges. The overall theme here is about understanding the ongoing processes of transformation, how societies adapt and grow, and how those changes shape the broader history of the subcontinent. This conclusion reminds us that history is a continuous story of change, influenced by internal developments and external encounters.